The town of Cedar Ridge was not a place marked on many maps. It existed as a small, sturdy stitch in the vast, rugged quilt of the frontier, a collection of wooden buildings huddled together for warmth and company against the sweeping winds and the endless sky. Here, life moved to the rhythm of the seasons and the rising and setting of the sun, a simple, sometimes hard but honest existence. And at the heart of this small world stood a simple wooden chapel, its whitewashed walls a beacon of hope and peace for the souls who called this place home. On this particular Sunday morning, the sun poured down like warm honey, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. The sound of a gentle hymn drifted from the chapel's open windows, carried on the breeze across the quiet town. Inside, the pews were filled with families, their faces familiar and weathered by life on the plains. Among them sat Jonah Briggs, a man whose very presence seemed as solid and reliable as the land he worked. He was a rancher, through and through, his hands calloused from rope and reins, his skin tanned by days spent under the open sky. He sat with his parents and his younger sister, his deep voice joining the song, his faith as much a part of him as the breath in his lungs. To Jonah, God was not a distant idea. He saw the evidence of the Creator in the miracle of a new calf taking its first wobbly steps, in the way the sun set the prairie grass ablaze with golden light, and in the quiet strength of his own family. But in the very back pew, tucked into the corner as if hoping the shadows would swallow her whole, sat a young woman named Grace. She was relatively new to Cedar Ridge, a quiet figure who had arrived with a heart already heavy with sorrow. She was a widow, her husband taken by a sudden fever back east, leaving her alone in the world. With no family of her own left, she had come to this distant town seeking a fresh start, but found only a deeper loneliness. She worked as a seamstress, her skilled fingers mending tears in trousers and letting out the seams of dresses for expectant mothers, each stitch a reminder of the life she had once dreamed of and lost. The joy and unity of the families around her in the chapel did not lift her spirit. Instead, it pressed in on her, making her feel her isolation all the more keenly. As the final prayer was said and the congregation began to rise, a soft chatter filling the room, Grace remained seated, her head bowed. The weight of her grief felt like a physical burden, a heavy cloak she could not remove. A single, silent plea formed in her heart, a desperate prayer sent heavenward from the depths of her despair. "Lord," she whispered inwardly, her eyes squeezed shut. "I'm so lost. I don't know which way to turn. Please show me the way." Jonah, gathering his hat, happened to glance toward the back of the church. His eyes fell upon the solitary figure of Grace. He knew of her as everyone in a small town knows of everyone, and he knew of her loss. He had seen her in the general store, her gaze downcast, and had tipped his hat in quiet respect, but they had never spoken. Now, seeing the slump of her shoulders and the profound sadness that seemed to surround her like a mist, he felt a strong and unexpected pull in his spirit. It was more than just pity, it was a calling, a small, quiet voice inside him that urged him to act. It was the same feeling he got when he saw a newborn lamb separated from its mother, a deep instinct to help, to protect, to guide. While others filed out, laughing and talking of Sunday dinners, Jonah hesitated. Then, slowly he walked down the aisle toward the back pew. His boots were quiet on the wooden floor. He stopped a respectful distance away, not wanting to startle her. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice low and gentle like the rumble of distant thunder. "Forgive me for intrudin', but, are you all right?" Grace looked up, startled. She quickly brushed a tear from her cheek, her face flushing with embarrassment. She saw Jonah Briggs standing there, his expression filled not with curiosity, but with genuine concern. His eyes were a steady, kind brown, and in them she saw no judgment, only a quiet strength. For a moment she considered lying, saying she was fine and hurrying away. But the loneliness was too great, the weight too heavy to carry alone for another moment. Her voice was barely a whisper as she confessed the truth that had been haunting her. "I feel lost," she admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and freeing to say aloud. Jonah nodded slowly as if he understood the landscape of a lost heart. He thought of the verse his mother had often recited, about our Heavenly Father leaving the 99 to find the one lost sheep. He didn't quote it aloud, that wasn't his way. Instead he lived it. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "Then follow me home," he said simply. Seeing the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, he quickly added, "My ma, she always cooks enough to feed the whole county on Sundays. There's a warm plate and a seat at the table with your name on it. No one should eat alone on the Lord's Day." It was an offer of pure, simple Christian kindness, an invitation to a meal, not a courtship. It was an offer of family for just an afternoon, to someone who had none. Grace looked at him, at his honest face, and then passed him to the open door of the chapel, which framed the bright, bustling world outside that felt so intimidating. Then she looked back at the quiet safety he offered. It was a risk, trusting a stranger. But the emptiness of her small room and her cold stove loomed large in her mind. And something in his spirit felt trustworthy. Taking a shallow breath, she gave a small, hesitant nod. That is very kind of you. Thank you. The walk to the Briggs Ranch was mostly quiet, filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Jonah pointed out simple things: a hawk circling high above, the patch of wildflowers his sister was so fond of, giving Grace time to settle her nerves. When the ranch house came into view, a sturdy, welcoming structure with smoke curling from its chimney and a wide porch, Grace felt a strange sense of calm. The air was filled with the delicious smell of roasting meat and fresh-baked bread. Inside, the house was a haven of warmth and noise. Jonah's mother, a plump woman with a kind face and flour dusting her apron, welcomed Grace without a moment's hesitation, taking her hands in her own as if she were an expected guest. His father shook her hand firmly, and his younger sister immediately began chatting about a new pony. They sat around a long wooden table laden with food. There was laughter and stories and the easy passing of bowls and platters. No one pressed Grace for her own story, but they included her in theirs. For the first time in over a year, Grace felt the icy knot of loneliness in her chest begin to loosen, just a little. She took a small bite of warm apple pie and felt a sensation she had almost forgotten, a flicker of hope. It was a small, fragile thing, like the first green shoot of a plant pushing through hard winter soil. She wasn't found yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time she felt that she might one day be on the right path. And it had all started with a whispered prayer and a cowboy's simple, faithful words, "Then follow me home." The following week in Cedar Ridge passed with the slow, steady pace that defined life on the frontier. For Grace, the days were measured in the length of thread she used and the number of seams she finished. The memory of the Sunday dinner at the Briggs Ranch felt like a dream, a warm, bright spot in what was otherwise a gray and quiet existence. She found her thoughts drifting back to the noisy, welcoming kitchen, the sound of shared laughter and the steady, calm presence of Jonah. It was a feeling so foreign to her now, a feeling of belonging that she had thought was lost to her forever. She tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself it was a single act of charity, not to be mistaken for anything more. But the small flicker of hope that had been lit that afternoon refused to be entirely extinguished. She was in the middle of letting out the waist of a dress for the blacksmith's wife when a soft knock came at the door of her small workshop. Puzzled, for she was not expecting anyone, she opened it to find Jonah standing on her porch, his hat in his hands and a small basket looped over his arm. He looked a little unsure of himself, a contrast to his solid confidence on his own land. "Good morning, Miss Grace," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I was in town to pick up some nails for a fence repair, and my ma, she insisted I bring you these." He held out the basket, and Grace could see it contained a dozen brown eggs, a small crock of fresh butter, and a jar of wild honey that caught the morning sun. She said a person can't live on bread and thread alone. It was a simple gesture, a practical gift from a household that had plenty to a person who lived alone. But to Grace it felt like a lifeline. It was a connection, a tangible reminder that she had been seen and remembered. She thanked him, her voice soft with a gratitude that went deeper than just for the food. Jonah lingered for a moment on the porch and they spoke of small, safe things, the unseasonably warm weather, the upcoming town social. The conversation was not long, but it was easy, and when he tipped his hat and walked away, the silence in her small rooms felt a little less heavy. This became the beginning of a new, gentle rhythm in Grace's life. Every few days, Jonah would find a reason to come to town. Sometimes it was to deliver a jug of fresh milk, other times a bundle of kindling wood he had split himself. His visits were never long, and they always took place on her porch or in the open doorway, with the bright light of day ensuring everything was proper and above reproach. He would ask about her work and she would slowly begin to ask about the ranch. He told her stories of a stubborn bull calf that thought it was a dog, and of the way the prairie looked after a rain, green and endless and new. He spoke of his faith not in grand sermons, but in the way he saw the hand of the Creator in the turning of the seasons and the birth of new life on the ranch. He listened, truly listened, when she haltingly began to share small, happy memories of her late husband, not dwelling on the grief, but honoring the joy that had once been. In turn, Grace started visiting the ranch more often, always under the warm and watchful eye of Jonah's mother. She began to help with the quilting bee, her skilled fingers making neat, tiny stitches that impressed the older woman. Sitting in the parlor with the other women, the frame between them heavy with a growing quilt, Grace started to feel the fragile roots of friendship beginning to take hold. She was no longer just the poor, sad widow from back east. She was becoming Grace, the seamstress with the gentle hands, the quiet young woman who was a friend to the Briggs family. She watched Jonah with his family, seeing the respect he showed his parents and the gentle way he teased his sister. She saw how he worked from sunup to sundown without complaint, his strength and patience a quiet testament to his character. The small, fragile hope inside her grew stronger, fed by these acts of kindness and this glimpse into a good, honest life. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple, Jonah found Grace sitting on a bench near the ranch's corral, watching the horses. He came and stood beside her, resting his arms on the top fence rail. For a long moment, they simply watched the animals in a comfortable silence. Then Jonah took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Grace," he began, his voice more serious than she had ever heard it. "These past weeks, getting to know you, they've been a real blessing to me. I've come to admire your strength and your gentle spirit more than I can rightly say." He turned to look at her then, his honest eyes meeting hers. "I would be honored, if you would allow me to officially court you. With the intention, God willing, and if it feels right to your heart, of a skin, for your hand in marriage one day." The air seemed to still around them. Grace's heart leaped into her throat. This was what she had, in the secret places of her heart, begun to hope for. Yet a cold fear gripped her just as tightly. To love again was to open herself up to the terrible, crushing pain of loss. The memory of her first husband's death was a shadow that never fully left her. Could she bear to risk her heart again? What if God's plan held more sorrow for her? She looked down at her hands, clenched tightly in her lap. "Jonah, that is a beautiful honor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I'm so afraid. To love is to risk a grief I am not sure I can survive a second time." Jonah nodded, his expression full of understanding. "I know it's a risk," he said softly. "I can't promise a life without hardship. That's not mine to give. But I can promise to walk beside you through all of it, with the good Lord as our guide. You don't have to give me an answer now. You pray on it. You ask God for His direction. I'll respect whatever path He lays on your heart." That night, back in her quiet room, Grace did exactly that. She knelt beside her simple bed and poured out her heart in prayer. She spoke of her fear, her longing, her hope, and her deep, deep caution. She asked for a sign, for clarity, for the courage to take a step forward if this was His will. As she prayed, a sense of profound peace settled over her, a feeling so warm and certain it could only have come from one place. It was as if a heavy door in her heart, long locked shut by fear, was being gently opened. The path before her, while still unknown, no longer looked dark and terrifying. It looked like a sunlit trail, leading toward a future she had dared not dream of. The next morning she found Jonah waiting on her porch as she somehow knew he would be. She met his gaze and a small, sure smile touched her lips for the first time in what felt like an age. "Yes, Jonah," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I have prayed and I would be honored to be courted by you." And in that moment, standing in the dawn's early light, the lost heart of Grace began truly to find its way home. The season turned and the world around Cedar Ridge transformed. The lush green of summer began to burn away into the brilliant gold and fiery red of autumn. The air grew crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and ripe apples, and the days grew shorter, drawing people closer to their hearths and to each other. For Jonah and Grace, the official period of their courtship was a time of deep and joyful discovery. Their outings were always proper and chaperoned, often consisting of long walks along the dusty lanes that bordered the town, or sitting together on the Briggs' wide porch after Sunday dinner, listening to the family's stories. They attended church services together each week, their shared faith forming the strong, steady foundation upon which their relationship was being built. Jonah would bring her small, thoughtful gifts, not expensive things, but tokens of his affection and attention. A smooth, interestingly shaped stone from the creek bed on his land, a book of poetry he had ordered special from the city, a feather from a blue jay, its color as bright as the autumn sky. Grace in turn shared more of herself. She began to laugh more freely, the sound like music to Jonah's ears. She told him stories of her childhood back east, of the books she had loved to read, and of the dreams she had once held. The shadow of her past grief did not vanish entirely, but it no longer defined her. Under the warmth of Jonah's steady love and the acceptance of his family, she was blossoming, becoming the woman she was always meant to be, strong, faithful, and full of a quiet, resilient joy. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, helping Jonah's mother preserve vegetables from the garden for the winter and learning to bake the bread that Jonah so loved. She saw the future not as a frightening unknown, but as a promise, a vast and beautiful landscape she was eager to explore with Jonah by her side. Jonah, for his part, was a man with a plan. Every spare moment he had, when he wasn't tending to the endless work of the ranch, was spent on a patch of land a short, respectful walk from his parents' house. There, with his own 2 hands and the help of his father and a few loyal friends, he was building a house. It was a small, sturdy structure made of timber and hope, with a stone chimney and windows that looked out toward the rolling hills. He did not tell Grace about it, wanting it to be a surprise, a physical representation of the future he was dreaming of for the 2 of them. He would imagine her in it, hanging curtains on those windows, preparing a meal at the hearth, filling the rooms with her presence and her love. This house was his prayer made of wood and nail, a testament to his commitment and his deep, abiding love for her. One cool, clear evening, when the last of the sunlight was gilding the tops of the distant mountains, Jonah asked Grace to take a walk with him. The path he chose was one they had walked many times before, but this time felt different. A nervous energy hummed in the air around him, and he held her hand a little more tightly. He led her up a gentle, familiar rise on his family's land, a place that offered a breathtaking view of the entire valley. From this spot, they could see the Briggs Ranch house, the barns, the grazing cattle like tiny dots in the distance, and the little town of Cedar Ridge nestled in the fold of the hills. It was the place where he felt closest to God, surrounded by the immense beauty of his creation. As they reached the top, the sky was a canvas of deepening violet and brilliant orange. Jonah stopped and turned to face Grace, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Grace," he began, his voice thick with emotion. He reached for both of her hands, holding them in his own. "When I first saw you in that chapel, my heart broke for your sorrow. I asked God to show me a way to help, to ease your burden somehow. I never imagined that He would lead me to this, to a love so deep and true it has changed everything I am." He looked into her eyes, seeing his future reflected in their depths. "This land, this view, this life, it don't mean a thing if I can't share it with you. You have brought a light back into my world that I never even knew was missing." Then, slowly, he released one of her hands and lowered himself to one knee right there on the soft grass. He pulled a small, simple ring from his pocket, a band of polished silver that caught the last rays of the sun. "Grace, will you do me the greatest honor of my life? Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and walk beside you in faith for all the days the Lord gives us?" Tears welled in Grace's eyes, but they were tears of pure, unblemished joy. She did not need a single moment to think or pray for guidance, for she had never been more certain of anything in her life. The path was clear and it led directly to him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Then, stronger and clearer, she said it again. "Yes, Jonah. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and as he stood and gathered her into a tender, respectful embrace, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, as if giving them a moment of privacy for their happiness. They stood there for a long time in the twilight, wrapped in each other and the profound peace of God's blessing, 2 hearts now beating as one, ready to begin their life's greatest adventure together. The wedding of Jonah and Grace was the kind of event the small town of Cedar Ridge would remember for years to come. It was held in the same simple chapel where their story had truly begun, now filled to bursting with friends, neighbors, and the sweet, hopeful scent of wildflowers that Grace and the other women had gathered from the prairie. Grace wore a dress she had sewn herself, a beautiful, simple gown of ivory cotton, and her face, framed by a few loose curls, shone with a happiness that seemed to light up the entire room. Jonah stood tall and proud at the front, his eyes glistening with unshed tears as he watched his future wife walk toward him on the arm of the town's kindly pastor, who had stepped in to give her away. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising before God and their community to love, honor, and cherish one another in sickness and in health, for all the days of their lives. When Jonah was told he could kiss his bride, he did so with a gentle reverence that spoke of a love that was both deep and enduring. The celebration that followed was held at the Briggs Ranch, with long tables of food, lively fiddle music, and laughter that echoed under the vast, blue sky. As the sun set, Jonah and Grace climbed into a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers, and they were waved off to begin their new life together in the little house Jonah had built with his own 2 hands. That first year of marriage was a time of quiet, profound joy and of building a life woven together from their 2 solitary threads. They settled into the rhythm of the ranch, their days beginning and ending with shared prayers of gratitude. Grace made the small house a home, filling it with the smell of baking bread and the warmth of her presence. She hung simple curtains at the windows and placed a bright quilt on their bed. Jonah worked the land with a renewed purpose. Every fence he mended and every animal he tended to was for her, for their future. In the evenings they would sit together on their own porch, watching the stars emerge one by one, talking about their dreams, their hopes, and their faith. Their love, founded on friendship and a shared belief in God, grew deeper and stronger with each passing season, a sturdy shelter against the world. Then one spring morning, as the world was waking up green and new, Grace discovered she was with child. The news filled their home with a kind of sacred, bubbling joy. They saw this new life not as a simple event of nature, but as a miraculous gift, a direct blessing from God on their union. Jonah was so overcome he swept Grace into a careful, joyful embrace, his prayers of thanks whispered into her hair. Grace placed a hand on her still flat stomach, her heart overflowing with a love so fierce and new it took her breath away. The months that followed were a time of happy preparation. Jonah, in the evenings after his work was done, would sit by the fire and carve a cradle from a strong piece of oak wood. He sanded it until it was perfectly smooth, each stroke of his hand a prayer for the child who would one day sleep within it. Grace, her hands skilled and sure, began to sew tiny garments. She stitched little gowns and knitted miniature socks, her heart singing with every loop of the yarn. They chose a name together, settling on Caleb, a strong, faithful name from the Bible that meant wholehearted, for they prayed their son would love the Lord with his whole heart. As the time for the baby's arrival drew near, the entire community shared in their anticipation. Jonah's mother was a constant, reassuring presence, and the women of the church brought meals and offered advice. The day finally arrived on a crisp autumn day, much like the one on which Jonah had proposed. The labor was long and hard, and Jonah paced the porch, his own heart contracting with every sound from inside the house. He prayed without ceasing, placing his wife and unborn child into God's capable hands. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a new, strong cry pierced the air, a sound more beautiful than any music. The doctor emerged, smiling wearily, and ushered Jonah inside. There, lying in their bed, was Grace, pale and exhausted but radiant with a mother's love. In her arms, swaddled tightly in a soft blanket, was their son. His face was red and puckered, and he had a shock of dark hair just like his father's. Jonah approached slowly as if approaching a holy altar, and knelt beside the bed. He reached out a trembling finger to gently stroke his son's tiny, perfect hand. Caleb's fingers instinctively curled around his father's rough, calloused one. In that moment, looking from his son's face to the weary but joyful face of his wife, Jonah felt the presence of God more powerfully than he ever had on any mountaintop or in any chapel. They had been given a most precious gift, a new life to love and to raise in the way of the Lord, and their family, their little piece of God's kingdom on earth, was now complete. The years, like a gentle and steady river, flowed onward from that joyful autumn day. The little house that Jonah had built witnessed the quiet, beautiful accumulation of a life lived in faith and love. The oak cradle that had held a newborn was now stored carefully in the loft, and in its place stood a small, sturdy bed where a vibrant young boy named Caleb slept each night. At 3 years old, Caleb was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, with his father's dark, earnest eyes and his mother's thoughtful smile. His days were filled with simple, profound adventures, chasing after fluffy chicks in the barnyard, helping his mother gather eggs, his small hands so careful with the fragile shells, and sitting on the porch steps as his father taught him the names of the constellations that dusted the vast night sky. The ranch was his entire world, a kingdom of wonder and discovery, and his parents were the steady, loving monarchs who ruled it with kindness and patience. One particularly peaceful evening, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber, the little family settled onto their porch. The day's chores were finished, and a contented silence had fallen over the land, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of a cow. Jonah sat in his worn wooden rocker, and Grace sat beside him on a bench, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. Caleb played contentedly on a quilt spread out on the porch floor, moving a small, carved wooden horse through an imaginary landscape of hills and valleys. Grace watched their son for a long moment, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. The simple, perfect beauty of the scene stirred a memory from the deepest part of her soul, a memory of a time when such a moment of peace and belonging would have seemed an impossible dream. She lifted her head and looked at Jonah, her voice soft as the evening breeze. "Do you remember," she began, a gentle smile touching her lips, "that Sunday in the chapel so long ago? When I told you I was lost?" Jonah's rocking slowed to a stop. He turned his gaze from the horizon to her face, his own expression softening with the memory. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb gently stroking the silver wedding band he had placed there years before. "I do," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "I remember it clear as day. I'm mighty glad you decided to follow me home that day." It was a statement that held the weight of their entire shared history. Grace's eyes swept over the view before them, the rolling pastures of their ranch, the sturdy home that had sheltered their love and their growing family, the healthy, happy child who was the living proof of God's faithfulness. She was quiet for another long moment, letting the gratitude wash over her. "I'm not lost anymore," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She looked back at Jonah, her eyes shining. "I have been following you and you have been leading us both home to this wonderful life. You led me home to this love, to this family, to this faith that has been our anchor through everything. Our faith led us to this forever after." Jonah didn't need to answer with words. He simply squeezed her hand, his love for her shining from his eyes, a silent agreement that echoed in the peaceful space between them. They had traveled a long road together, from a whisper of despair in a quiet chapel to this porch, this sunset, this shared life. Their story was a testament to the truth that even when a heart feels utterly lost, God's plan is always at work, often using the kindness of others to guide the way, leading his children step by step, prayer by prayer, toward a love that lasts forever. And friends, that is the beautiful end of Jonah and Grace's story. But there are so many more stories like theirs waiting to be told. Tales of hope found in unexpected places, of faith that moves mountains, and of love that is built to last a lifetime. If you would like to join us for more of these heartfelt journeys, we invite you to become a part of our community. By subscribing to our channel, you can ensure you never miss a new story. It's a simple way to bring more inspiration and faith-filled lessons into your own life. We share these stories hoping they touch your heart, and we would be so honored to have you along for the next one. So, until we meet again in the next tale, may God bless you and keep you, and may you always trust in His plan for your own life's journey.